Look up the Ferguson Effect. Look up the Floyd Effect. It is a real term.
You cannot
It's a real term. I didn't make this up.
Invent a connection between two things just because you want that connection to be there.
It's like a name. It's a real thing. You can look it up.
Right. It could be right.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Loopcast. Today I have a special guest, Ryan Girdusky. Is it Girdusky?
Yeah, it's Girdusky. You got it right.
Sweet. I should have asked you before we recorded.
Yeah, it's okay.
I didn't do that. We got a native New Yorker, Roman Catholic. Ryan came on my radar because he found the Loopcast clip we did of his trip to CNN.
In the context of riots, he was saying, let's just bring the military into it to deal with American citizens. I mean, that happened yesterday.
Right, but the post-George Floyd riots resulted in an excess of over 15,000 black male deaths in this country. How?
Yeah.
The surge of violent crime, it was like Ferguson, the Ferguson Effect and the Floyd Effect.
Respectfully, you got to explain to me how George Floyd's death.
Yeah.
Because I need causation here.
Yes,
you really are
because what
messing me
happens
up
is
here.
after the Ferguson riot and after the Floyd riot, policemen, in fear of their jobs many times and political coverage, pull back from their jobs, resulting in an increased level of homicide.
I got to stop you there because hold on.
You can look at the Washington Post.
Ryan, we got to stop you there because you're literally making a connection out of your own conjecture.
No,
you cannot.
It's a real thing.
That.
Look up the Ferguson Effect. Look up the Floyd Effect. It is a real term.
You cannot.
It's a real term. I didn't make this up.
Invent a connection between two things just because you want that connection to be there.
It's like a name. It's a real thing. You can look it up.
Right. It could be right. It doesn't mean it's accurate. Yeah.
Let's move on because we use their point.
Look it up. I'll send you a reading list after the show.
Before we move on, I think there's
Hold on. I just want everyone to settle down because people cannot hear at home when everybody's talking at once, okay?
I have many questions. First among them, you went viral beyond the CNN bubble, I have to say, which congratulations. I'm not a regular watcher of CNN, but that was everywhere. But you presumably were going to have a debate based on crime statistics. And
no, it was a debate about something completely different. We were talking about, I think it was Trump with the black community, and it was on Abby Phillips' show, and Abby's a sweetheart for having me on especially. But she said something to the effect of like, he said he wanted to bring the military in to break up riots. And I'm like, anything to break up the riots, the post-Floyd riots would have been a good thing because they led to an excess number of deaths, as studied many times by both the Ferguson Effect and the Floyd Effect. Abby has written about the Ferguson Effect for the Washington Post 10 years ago. I didn't know that at the time. I do know that now. But it is a very common thing for people who talk about crime a lot, that they know this is a real thing. And Bakari Sellers, who has made his name being a professional race baiter, was on, and he was sitting there and saying, like, he did his best Foghorn impersonation. It was like, I've never heard of this before. Like, it was bizarre. And then the girl next to me didn't know, Ashley, I think her name is, she didn't know. She's like, I don't know what this is. Abby said I was making it up. I was like, did I just do drugs right now that no one has heard of this besides of me? And I was like, this can't possibly be like the case that none of you had any idea what I was talking about.
And for starters, I won't interrupt you here. I'll let you say it.
No, it's whatever.
What is the Ferguson Effect?
I'm long-winded sometimes, so
all good. So what is the Ferguson Effect for those that don't know?
So the Ferguson Effect, which came after the Ferguson riots in 2014, sat there and said that police, after there's a racialized shooting of a black person by a white police officer in 2014, and obviously in 2020, that wasn't a shooting, it was the knee in the neck. After these racialized incidents with police officers, police don't interact with possible suspects that often. They kind of quit, where they just will not be that active because they are afraid of their jobs, they're afraid of political fallout, and as a result, crime goes up. And that's why there was an increased number of car accident deaths, because cops weren't pulling over reckless drivers as much. That's why there was an increase in homicide. The biggest homicide jump, I think almost ever happened in 2020 or 2021. And those were all results of Ferguson and the Floyd effect. These are very common terminologies in the criminal justice world or criminal, reform world, whatever. You could disagree with it. You could say it wasn't real or was real or whatever. Steve Saylor has a bunch of stats on this that I constantly look up. So I was, anyway, they were aghast that I made this comparison, and that anything that I think led to that wasn't, flowers and sunshine post Floyd, racial reckoning is insane. But Abby had me on her show 2 days later, so I couldn't say anything that offensive.
You know what's funny? You used the word aghast, and it almost went beyond that. It wasn't even because the Ferguson effect, under your explanation, it at least makes some rational sense to at least acknowledge your argument or your line of logic and then argue against that or present other statistics. But that didn't happen. I mean, I was watching the show, and it basically was, we're going to act like you said a slur and then talk over you and not even acknowledge your reaction. So, and you're talking to people
who love talking over me on that show.
Right. and presumably these people, as you said, the host has written about it. They should be aware of it at the very least.
You're on national television to talk about news. Right. I assume you should know something. And then the 2 days later, the last episode that I was on the show, I was on with this other woman, and she sat there and said something to the effect of I was talking about demographic changes with immigration, especially around Jews and Muslims. In the very near future, this country will have more Muslims than it does have Jews, simply because of immigration. That's just how the numbers work. And you could just see the one hamster in the brain turning, and it was I was a Scooby-Doo moment where I was ruh-roh, and she just did not know what I was that I was saying that. And she's like, how do you think that makes Jews feel? And I'm I don't know. I'm not Jewish, but you should look at the numbers, and if this makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should say something about it.
So can I ask as well, where do they find these people to be on these panels?
A friend of mine works for CNN and said they were looking for another conservative voice. I'm putting your name in in the group of people, possibilities. And then I met with the people who do the talent hiring there and the talent coordinating there or whatever. And I said to them, look, I assumed immediately, you're not going to get it. It's whatever. So, we had a meeting, and I said, listen, if you want a Republican who's going to apologize for being a Republican, it ain't me. It ain't me. And that's fine. It's just not me. But they said, no, we're not. To CNN's credit, and they deserve credit for this. They said, no, we're not looking for that. We're looking for somebody who's going to stand up for, Trump and what they believe in. And the videos have been doing very well and going viral.
So that's my point, because I've enjoyed watching you, and I've enjoyed watching Scott Jennings is probably the other one. And to your point, you guys you're going on there to make your points, and you're not going to back down from them. I guess similarly, they're reaching out to people that are left-leaning, liberal, that you would hope would have convictions about their points as well. So what does it say to you that people felt very convicted but didn't have any of the research or terminology to bring it up?
I think the bigger thing is that in left-wing circles, you as a right-winger in America, you cannot not hear left-wing opinions. You can't. You can't escape it. It is the dominant cultural opinion on almost everything, right? There is nothing that you could do to escape hearing a left-wing opinion. As a left-winger, you don't ever have to interact with a conservative if you don't want to, especially in more elite circles. You just don't have to hear their opinions. They are so, it's like a right-wing ghetto. They don't have their opinions. Or if you hear a Republican, you hear a Joe Scarborough Republican.
Wait a second. I don't know if I'd call him a Republican.
He was a Republican congressman.
I know it's
but that's their idea of what a Republican is. It's a Republican who's trying to make remorse. It's Adam Kinzinger. It's Liz Cheney. It's we know what your party wants, war and tax cuts. That's it. So there's nothing besides skin deep surface on that. So I think it speaks more to the volumes of oh, I have an opinion that I've literally never heard of before because I don't have to hear opinions that I don't like. And I think that is really what is the most shocking thing is they just don't have to hear anything that they don't care to hear. That is pretty surprising. And it doesn't exist the other way around. Republicans cannot ignore Democratic opinions.
Yeah, and do you think that the phenomenon you're discussing here of kind of being able to stay in the elite bubble, have a lot of protection, kind of led to, say, the Kamala Harris-Brett Baier interview, where she all of a sudden got asked questions for the first time that she hadn't before?
I don't think it's that. I think that Kamala Harris is very, very, very... I don't think that she's a woman who is enormously comfortable in her own skin. That doesn't register to me. I think she cares a lot about other people's opinions moment to moment. I think she's a bit of a shapeshifter as far as her identities go. I don't even talk about racial identities go, but I'm talking about being a hard-on crime, district attorney versus a very left-wing senator to being a middle-of-the-road person. As vice president, as the presidential candidate, she's somebody could be anything she wants to be at any moment in time. And I don't think that she's somebody who's enormously comfortable in her own skin and somebody who's very easy to, I think she's very aware all the time what people are thinking of her. So when she's doing the Brett Baier interview, she's trying to, you have to think to yourself, one, if you're doing an interview, major interview, what is the goal? What is the audience you're trying to reach, right? What is the goal of, what are you getting? Are you trying to promote a book or promote a TV show? Are you trying to win over voters? And if so, what kind of voters? Which kind of voters? If you're trying to win over Liz Cheney, middle of the road, Fox News viewers, and Fox has a ton of viewers who are middle of the road, believe it or not. Do you do it by coming off combative, or are you doing that interview to have it for clickbait for tomorrow and then rerun it on Morning Joe, rerun your best of on MSNBC the next day and clip it for your audience only? I think it was more of the latter than the former. I don't think that she was trying to win over a ton of people in real time, because in real time, it's, we've seen the clips now and some of the question and answers are good. Some of them are bad, but in real time, she was speaking over him. Even at the very end, when he said, "What's your website?" The easiest thing to plug, she's
Right.
kept talking after her saying her website. And he was like, "Okay, we got to go now." And it cut off. She's like, "Okay, thanks, bye." It was the worst.
Handlers.
It was the worst first date I've ever seen before, in my life. It was just horrendous. And I think that is really where, it was just incredibly awkward and strange. But doing podcasting, doing interviews, being interviewed over and over and over again in combative situations, you really do start building skill sets. She doesn't do interviews. She really doesn't. She does very flattering puff piece interviews. And she screws some of those up too, The View. And also I think the big problem for her is that she can't insult Joe Biden any more than he's already been insulted. So when they ask questions about what would you do different than Joe, she can't sit there and say, "Oh yeah, what a freaking terrible president he is." She can't. She kind of has to walk a very, very difficult line.
For sure. And so you went on to CNN, obviously very hostile interview. So those skill sets you're talking about, I have two questions. One, so you went into that interview presumably with a goal. What was that goal, first off? And then number two, you have this kind of contentious moment with people that you've self-described as race baiters. What is it like after the interview? So you have this exchange. It's very intense. What are those people like after? Are you guys talking afterwards? Did you guys bring up the folks in effect?
So funny that you say that. So everyone is different. Van Jones couldn't be a nicer guy. Really, really friendly. Starts chit-chatting about a million things. Really, 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 really friendly. Brian Stelter, really friendly guy. Wants to sit there and have a normal conversation afterwards. Abby Phillips, super normal, very pleasant, very nice. My earpiece, if you my last appearance, my earpiece kept popping out. I have very narrow ear canals. Like this is like a first world issue, but very so my earpieces, I have to have very small earpieces in my ear in order to like fit them in. And she was talking about this custom company. You can buy a custom earpiece for $50, whatever. Anyway, very, very nice. The two women sitting beside me for the episode of the Ferguson Effect, one looked at the other, pointed at me in commercial break and said, "What's his name?" And the woman sitting next to me goes, "I have no idea." I am 7 to 10 inches away from you. Like I literally can hear every word you're saying. And it's so awkward then. And I was just like, it's like Mean Girl stuff. Like I get it, like whatever. But I don't give a shit. And also like in real time, one of them got real quiet and like wouldn't speak, as if like, oh, look at this like, white man yelling over me. So like people are very aware of how they're coming across. People who are very good at it are aware of how they're coming across moment to moment. But like Bakari Sellers was like, he was talking about, he's good friends with Kamala Harris. So he was like, she's going to win in a landslide. She's going to do da-da-da-da. And like, it was weird. It was not the friendliest. The last time that I was on there was this one guy. I've been on the show with him. I've been on CNN 5 times. Tonight will be my 6th. But the guy next to me, like on my last show, and this is what he did the first show too. Commercial break goes on. He takes out his phone and he starts watching basketball. And he doesn't say a word. And like, I know nothing about basketball. I can't even bullshit my way through a conversation. And I'm like, how's the game? Like, it's like, it's too quiet. And I'm like, we have 6 minutes now to stand in total silence as you watch a basketball game. Yeah. But that's fine. Like, he's not combative. The blonde girl I was actually in an argument with a lot of my last episode. Most of them are very, very friendly. Very rarely are they, because you're together for an hour. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have an hour of a lot of downtime and like nothing going on. And so most times they're very friendly. Once in a while, I'm like, this is not my crowd, but that's okay.
And so when you go onto this show, you're going to be in a combative situation. You said people come in with the purpose. What was your purpose? Was your purpose to get a clip out of it? Was your purpose to go in and make your argument?
I don't think that I'm going to be picked as like the talent, because I just don't think they're going to pick another, I think if they're going to hire another conservative commentator, I think it's probably going to be a woman, because they don't have any female conservatives who are actually like Republicans still. So I don't think it's going to be me. So what I keep saying of it is like, let me throw red pills to a CNN audience that otherwise will not hear it. Like, let me have a conversation that's brutally honest and doesn't, like, I have an allergy to talking to adults like they're children. It really like makes me go psychotic. So I'm not going to sit there and infantilize you with like, oh yeah, let's reconfirm your pre-existing ideas. And doesn't mean I take up every argument, because that's just too much and no one wants to hear that. But like talking about like immigration changes, like we are going to be a country where there's more Muslims than there are Jews. And what does that look like for future foreign policy? What does that look like for future elections? What does it look like for the Democrat and Republican Party if Kamala loses? Because there was a poll that was out yesterday showed a plurality of Muslims supporting Trump. And the woman I was on, the reporter I was on, saying she interviewed like 100 Muslim business owners in, I think it was Michigan, and she said not a single one was voting for Kamala Harris. So like, what does that look like when that voter base is a bigger, easier get than Jewish voter bases? Like, how does that change politics? That is a very, very controversial question when you really dig into it, and it opens up a lot of other things. No one pushed back and said that what isn't true. Like, that's not going to happen. They were all like, oh, yeah, that makes complete and perfect sense. Some of them were afraid once they thought that through, but that is a very real thing.
Can I ask you then on that point? Because I actually saw that moment and everyone was completely silent. And I even saw the mayor of Hamtramck has endorsed Donald Trump as well, which is huge. But what are the implications of that? You said you think it through. It's the implications of it are scary to people. What are the implications of there being a Muslim majority?
If you look at Muslim population growth in places like Michigan and Georgia, and they are swing states, and they will continue to be swing states, let's say, for at least the next 2-3 election cycles, right? States change trends all the time. But let's say next 3 election cycles they are, as the Muslim population grows in these states, and they are the titular swing voters in these states. They decide these states' elections and the 33, 34 electoral college votes in these states. Well, then support for Israel unconditionally becomes a real question. It becomes a real thing where you sit there and say, I don't know, maybe this isn't what I want to do if these 34 electoral college votes ride or die with it. And certainly the mayor of that town that you mentioned, right? Hamtramck was an all-white town.
It was Polish.
20 years ago. That's where Kat Timpf is from. It's a literally all-white town 20 years ago, and now everyone is Muslim. So, if you just went back to the year 2000, said to this people in this town, most people here will be Muslim in the next 20 years, they would have thought you were on drugs.
Yeah, if you go, there's actually Arabic on the streets. I grew up not super far from Hamtramck.
Well, that's Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And, this demographic displacement that causes mass anxiety on broad levels with people was considered by the left optimal so long as it made white working class people uncomfortable. We're going to give them diversity, screw them. But once their coalitions are negatively affected by this, and once people have to recalibrate large geopolitical issues, which is always the case when you have mass demographic changes, but once that becomes, very, very in front of your eyes on such a big issue like Israel, then all of a sudden you sit there and say, maybe this isn't the way we want to go. Now, the left wouldn't admit to that, on CNN to me right then and there, but I guarantee you, I was told by people who were I saw your clip and wow, I never thought of it like that. So it's just worth having those kinds of conversations and me throwing these red pills over issues like crime and immigration and demographic change and conversations people aren't having. I'll throw out a couple, I'll sprinkle it in. And, it's, as my friend Buck Sexton says, it's your greatest hits, you're coming up with right now. So, I'll just sprinkle it in, and if it makes anybody sit there and question the current narratives, then that's completely worth it to me.
Yeah, you're doing the Lord's work, I think. So I actually did hear you on Buck's show, and I know that you're also the writer of the National Populist newsletter.
Yeah,
huge plug. Go check it out. It's fantastic. Yeah, I just found it yesterday.
Oh, so you don't subscribe?
Not yet, but I will.
Okay, so
I literally just found it yesterday. Don't put me on blast like that.
I'm just kidding. I don't care.
No, but yeah, so I was listening to you on Buck, and you were talking elections. I know that you're big into the data. One of the big things that came up was this early voting phenomenon. We're actually getting a lot of information back right now that will have implications for this election coming up in 15, 14 days at this point. So what is jumping off the sheet when you look at early voting in terms of the numbers?
So it's hard to say. So there's 7 swing states, right? Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. Those are the 7 states that decide the election. Well, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania have partisan voting, right? You register as a Republican or Democrat. The other states don't. Arizona and Nevada give past voter history. Pennsylvania and North Carolina don't. Georgia gives out race. Michigan and Wisconsin don't. There's not, you really can only get so much information out of these Secretary of State's offices. It's actually enormously frustrating. So without trying to find needles in the haystack where you can sit there and read every tea leaf to the point of, that it makes no sense, I'll say that in Nevada and in Arizona, where past voter history is public information, Republicans are getting a lot of low propensity voters out to vote. The Democratic margin in Clark County is really not very, very heavy. I think John Ralston said it was 3,000 or 4,000 last night. Then I heard it was more than that, but it's not that many. Certainly the Reid machine, as it was known for decades that ran that state and made it a Democratic state, is not performing like they used to. And that's very, very interesting. Arizona, I was even told by a Democrat, they've kind of written it off that they're going to lose it. So
Can I ask you? You said low propensity voters. Do you could you give a few examples of what demographics this would be?
So voters are rated 0 to 4, right? So if you're a 4 voter, that means you voted in 4 of the last 4 elections: the presidential primary, the midterms, the midterm primary, the last presidential general. You are a perfect voter. You are almost certainly going to vote. That voting block, right? They don't need to get them heavily out in the early vote. It's great that they bank those votes, but they don't need them because a 4-4 voter is almost 100% going to go vote. Like there's almost nothing that's going to stop them from going to vote because they are a reliable voter. 3 of 4 voters are 3 of the last 4 elections, right? They maybe missed a primary. 2 of the last 4 is maybe they vote just general elections. 1 of 4 is very unreliable, and 0 of 4 is either a new voter who's never voted before or somebody who's registered to vote but never shows up. I have people in my own life who just don't vote. They registered to vote, but they do not vote. So, and every once in a while they'll clean the polls of the 0s to 4s. Like in New York where I'm from, I think it's like every 8 or 10 years. If you have never voted in those 8 to 10 years, you're kicked off the voter rolls because it's assumed that you have died or moved or whatever. Whatever. So anyway, you want to, in the early vote, get the 0s and 1s of 4s because they are not reliable to show up on election day. Republicans are doing a better job at getting a larger percentage of their early vote and absentee vote being 0s of 1s in Arizona and Nevada. And that's very important. That means they're not eating away their election day vote.
Gotcha. So right now you're saying Pennsylvania and Arizona, you said, is almost
Arizona and Nevada. They provide that.
Sorry.
Pennsylvania doesn't have early voting. It has absentee voting only. So absentee voting ends in 7 days on the 29th. That is the last day to apply for an absentee ballot. Democrats right now hold, I think it was 525,000 absentee ballot request lead over Republicans. Now they usually have loads more, like hundreds of thousands of more absentee ballot requests. So the fact that it's 525, if Republicans can get it under 500,000, that's very, very good. You have until election day to either hand in the ballot or mail it back. If Republicans' problem so far is that they've not been returning ballots at the same speed that they've been requesting them. A lot of people have told me that they plan on handing in their absentee ballot on election day, which I don't understand why. Just freaking throw it in the mailbox or go to the post or go to like the Board of Elections now and just hand it in. But they are Democrats' advantage in the early vote returns is like 350,000, which is very, very small. They will need upwards of 500,000 to be in a very comfortable place on election day.
Because the implication is that Republicans wait until election day to vote, typically.
Yes, and the goal Democrats have in Pennsylvania always is to have so many mail-in ballots that come election day, it doesn't really matter what Republicans do because election day voters are always, the baby's sick, the car has a flat, it's raining, whatever, work runs late. People forget to vote. You just forget what day of the week it was. It happens all the time. So they can count on election day turnout they don't want to wait in line that long, whatever the case is, or the machines don't work or whatever. So they can, they can sit there and make them wait or not have a high enough turnout, and that way that the election, the early vote numbers are so large that they don't have to worry come election day, no matter what Republicans do. In 2020, I think Democrats had over 1 million in Pennsylvania, and like 1 million more than Republicans did. And then in 2022, it was like 600,000. So if Republicans can get under 500,000 for Democrats, keep them under 500,000, they'll be in a very strong spot come election day.
For sure. And you may have already partially answered this, but what are the biggest differences you've seen compared to the 2020 election to what you're seeing right now? I mean,
COVID, that's just like it's COVID. It's a whole different world. It's almost impossible to sit there and quantify the two elections. We will see what, the problem for a lot of voters, especially for right-wing voters, is they assume these elections are a lot more fixed in the sense of like the populations are fixed than they are. In Georgia, I think there was something like 100,000, maybe it was more than 100,000, 110,000, 120,000 new early voters, and with no past voting history in the state. They never voted before. And your mind immediately goes to, oh, they must be like young Kamala voters who are surging to the polls. And then I looked at the numbers, and because they break the numbers both based on race and age and sex, and they were mostly older people. They were mostly over the age of 55 because they're all the retirees who moved to Georgia from the north, or like it's too cold, or people priced out of Florida who can't afford it anymore. Whatever the case is, who move up north. There wasn't like 70 or 80,000 new senior citizens voting, or people over 55. I would say. Older people, though, voting that had never voted in the state before, that were newly registered. Populations are constantly changing and influxing. I mean, under Joe Biden's presidency, 3 million people became citizens. Those are millions of new voters that we have no history for. So, not to mention all the 18-year-olds people turning 17, becoming 18 and being able to vote. All of those things are like a huge influx of new voters. So I think people's natural assumption is like, oh, how different could it be from 4 years ago? Well, there's literally a huge population that didn't exist 4 years ago in every one of these states. Because the post-COVID transient people definitely affected how a lot of these elections are.
Right. And what's your read on that? So you have a lot of these new people. I think the Harris campaign would say it's, oh, this youth, they're excited to vote for Harris Wallace, whatever. Older people might disagree with that. Maybe young Republican enthusiasm. Which way? What's your read right now on the new voters?
I mean, certainly a lot of them are young people. That does happen as time goes by, and that will be an overwhelming voting bloc for Kamala, and that's worrisome. A lot of them are engaged young voters. I mean, the thing is, like places like Pennsylvania, right? If Pennsylvania goes for Trump, a big person to thank for it is Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro made automatic voter registration once you get your driver's license, either for the first time or renewed. You have to get a voter registration ID. And in 2000, and I think it was 16, it was 538 that reported, so there were something like 2.6 million non-college educated white voters in Pennsylvania who were not even registered to vote. So 2.6 million Americans, I should say, white, non-college educated white Americans who were not registered to vote in the state of Pennsylvania. Those are people who probably are low propensity future Republican voters if they were ever engaged and worked on.
So what usually happens with those people is they just don't register to vote. Maybe they want to vote on the day, but then they realize, oh, I'm not registered. I can't.
Or they just don't vote. Yeah.
So even just being automatically registered,
at least you can sit there and make a decision and be like, you know what? I will, like my dad, who's 61, Fox News viewer, you know what I mean? A very dedicated voter. His best friend, Jimmy, he like best friend. They agree on virtually everything. They go to Rangers games together. And election day 2016, Jimmy went to go vote. And he goes, I'm not registered. I said, well, when's the last time you voted? And it was like 1988. Like he just didn't vote. And so he couldn't vote for Trump the very first time. Then he had to register, whatever. My uncle, who is like the face of like a Fox News dad, his brother was like, I'm going to go vote this time. And I was like, did you check your registration? I was like, when was the last time you voted? And he was like, I think 1992. Wow. And I'm like, to me, it seems like insane that you didn't vote for 2 decades. But then my own cousin, who was complaining because she realized that she's not registered to vote anymore because she's 37 and has never voted before, ever, even though she's been registered since she was 18. The number of people who don't vote is startling, and those who are not registered is incredible. I will tell you a really, really, really quick funny story. My first election I could vote in was the 2008 presidential election. And I was dating this girl at the time, and she was for Obama and I was for McCain. And on election day, she had called me and she said to me, did you know you needed to register before you go out and vote? And she's like, I can't vote. So I mean,
did you withhold that information from her?
No, I just didn't even know. I mean, I just assumed that you would know. I was watching, remember the Super Bowl from this last year where there was the Kennedy ad?
Oh, yeah.
I'm with my best friend since I was like 15 years old. My friend, I'm not going to say her name. But anyway, we're watching it. She's not super political. And the Kennedy ad came on. And she looked at me and she goes, "What are they selling?" And I was like, I said, "Kennedy is running for president." And she goes, "JFK is running for president?" And I go,
No.
I was like, "Die." Like,
oh, no.
I was like, he would be 115 if he was still alive, but he very famously had his brains blown out in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
So like, no, he's not running for president. But,
okay, so
yeah.
Can I ask you quickly then? So you're giving a lot of anecdotes of people saying, "Hey, I'm going to vote for the first time. Hey, I'm going to vote for the first time." Is there something about the characteristics of this race in particular that's making people who don't vote before vote now?
I don't think there's anything specifically in particular that make this want to go vote. I think the voters that Trump is leaning on heavily. The New York Times reported this even last year, or maybe 2 years ago, that Trump's support among people who are not registered is higher than those who are registered. And non-college educated white voters specifically have the worst voting turnout among any demographic group aside from recent immigrants. They vote at the least frequent rate besides recent immigrants. So the untapped potential is just enormous. Young men vote at a much lower rate than young women do. And I think that they're just looking at the map of where do we go. We can't get wine moms to change their mind on us. You know what I mean? They can't get Lincoln Project Republicans to change their minds on us. Where are we going to go? The only answer is low propensity voters or non-voters who listen to bro podcasts and, Andrew Schultz or whatever, and they are just infrequent voters, but there's millions of them. And that's why I think their media strategy and their campaign strategy is let's rely on those voters.
Right. And have Trump work at McDonald's and then go to the Steelers game at night.
That is just, that's good old fashioned American politics. Every year we see, a politician put on a factory vest and go out, and do stupid stuff like that. But that's classic American politics. And the left, just the idea of humanizing him drives them to a broken place in their heart where they can't recover. Yeah.
I mean the phenomenon of, so it's funny, we were talking about this on the show the other day, how the left kind of had an initial reaction, but then coalesced around maybe a more palatable one. Their first one was to denigrate people that work at McDonald's, which was just unbelievable that would be the first instinct of the Tolerance Party. But it was, I can't believe you do that. That's so embarrassing to admit you would work at McDonald's.
Yeah, and even though Kamala is that's her only private sector work experience,
well,
allegedly.
I heard Christine Blasey Ford said she heard that she worked at McDonald's too. So.
I mean, the funny thing is the media who fact checks if Trump Tower sells taco bowls will not question any of her narratives and be like, there were 5 McDonald's close to your house. No one there remembers you working there. You don't have any there's no evidence. You wrote a whole memoir and you didn't mention that you worked at McDonald's, and you mentioned every job you ever had. It's just they just do not question the narrative because it is so the week and the 3 weeks they were drumming for Joe Biden to get out of the race. That was the only time ever that a Democrat will know what it's like to be a Republican with the media. That is the only 3 weeks any Democrats ever been had to be what it's like to be with a Republican.
It was so bizarre. I remember living through that too and noticing that phenomenon for the first time. And I think especially after the debate, it did really feel like for the first time it was a setup. He was set up essentially to fail, and then to see the media reaction immediately after to be negative, whereas there was no kind of traditional spin zone of, he did fine. Maybe there's a little bit of that.
He said he defeated Medicaid. How do you say he did fine? Literally, how do you say that he did fine? I mean, we are you can't spin it. There was just no, first of all, some people did spin it and said Jake Tapper was unfair to him, which is Jake Tapper literally did, because Jake Tapper didn't fact check Trump throughout the entire debate. He said he defeated Medicaid. Like, there's no way, and I know what he was trying to do. I know he meant to say we defeated COVID, but he said Medicaid, and there was no way out of it at that point. Like, the minute he said that line, it was over. The whole thing was over. Trump shouldn't have accepted that debate, because if he was, we'd be talking about, can he win New Jersey? Not, is he going to win the election?
Right. And can I ask then too, so of course there was the swap. Have you noticed any characteristic change between Joe Biden, what he may have won if he would have continued with his campaign, and maybe what Kamala loses now that she's not Joe Biden and they made the switch?
I mean, what Joe Biden won, they're going to memorialize him as like the greatest hero who ever lived. But, Joe Biden's campaign was going down in flames, like to the point of there was a real conversation that New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, and New Jersey and Maine were all on the table, like up for grabs. And the map was shrinking at a very fast speed for Democrats. And it wasn't just that swing voters were leaning towards Trump. It's also that Democrat voters weren't going to go vote. And that would have cost them down ballot races to the point of, you would be talking about 56, 57 Senate seats. I mean, it would have been so bad Carrie Lake may have won. Like, that's how bad it would have been for Democrats. The thing is that, so once that change happened, all this excitement came from young Democrats, from young progressives, from swing voters, from, girl bosses and all the rest of it. But I think that my question is what happens to like the Catholic voters, because Biden did win Catholics over? What happens to more white working class people in Pennsylvania who had a favorable opinion of Joe Biden because of his whole, persona?
Union Joe. Yeah.
Union Joe. Like, I mean, those kinds of things do matter. And a lot of voters have the feeling of like, does this candidate like people like me? And I don't think a lot of people think Kamala likes people like her.
I think it's fair to think that. San Francisco liberal.
Right.
Probably not going to win over Pennsylvania. But so you mentioned down ballot. You mentioned more local things for sure. Are there any down ballot races that you're watching very closely?
Well, my school board races for my PAC.
So let's talk 1776. So you started this project PAC called 1776 Project PAC to reform school boards across America. Now, first off, I just got to ask, many people are frustrated with their school board, but they don't do anything about it. So what caused you to actually start this, and then how does it work?
So in 2021, my godson, who goes to public school in New York, his teacher, when they were doing like Google Classroom, his teacher was making them read the book Race Cars, which is about how this was a third grade class, by the way, how they teach kids to read, how police cars follow black cars, not white cars, because they profile and they're racist. In a classroom where I would say, oh, yeah, it's a real book.
What a twist. I thought it was just going to be about race cars.
No. And there was a book called It Happened in Our Town, or Something Happened in Our Town. It ended up like sparking huge outrage, and the teacher is a complete left-wing lunatic. And my aunt, along with several other parents, had called me because I got the city council member elected. I knew the PTA people. I could get with the principal. And it just kind of dawned on me, like, I wonder how big of an issue this really is, or if this one isolated school. And I was like, I could make a difference. We don't have school boards in New York because we have mayoral control, but in other places they do have school boards. And I was like, I wonder if I could do something with this. And I made the PAC, and I called someone I know from Axios, and I said, I had no money, I had no nothing, but I called someone I knew at Axios, and I said, can you report that I started a PAC for school boards? And she said, sure. She wrote it up, and then Tucker Carlson had me on his show, and Tucker told his audience, donate to Ryan Girdusky. And I raised like $100,000 in like 16 hours. It was like crazy. And
the Tucker effect is
real. I know, from that Tucker endorsement, because Tucker said literally donate to Ryan Girdusky. It broke like all the money, the records that we had. And I was like, okay, I have $100,000. How do I find a school board now? It's not like there's a directory. And I got a summer intern. And I said, it's kid Brian, who was like the best person in the world. I said, Brian, go on Facebook and like type in like concerned parents of, and like, let's punch in some random counties and find some school board candidates And we did. And I think we endorsed 57 candidates our first year, and we won 42 seats. And, it's just been growing like wildfire. My PAC is I think it's number 26 on WinRed for all PACs across and we do school board elections, but we've done, I think we've done maybe 600, 700 school board races at this point. It's a lot. And I think we've won several hundred school board races. So,
and you're finding these people. Well, initially finding them on Facebook, and maybe you still use that. But
no, we don't use it anymore. But that's how we did. I mean, no, that would be chaotic. No,
I love a good scrappy startup story. Really, just warms my heart.
But what do you do? I just didn't know what to do. So I was like,
that's my question. Then is so you just found these people on Facebook, and you won a majority of those races.
Yeah,
you had so was it? What was it about what you were doing that made you win these races? Was it because there was this large animus against kind of left-leaning curriculums? Was it that you had more money than people? What helped you win those races?
I think that at the time, that year we had really good candidates at a time when education was a really big issue, when Youngkin was running for governor, and we were really very motivated on these issues about school boards. What we have done successfully since then, because there were a ton of parent organizations that started up in that year, and most have fizzled out already. What we were what we did correctly was, one, we developed a small dollar fundraising program based on, okay, here's the candidates we have backed to have won. What have they done since then? So we give them constant updates. This school district passed parental rights. This school district did this. This school district did that, keeping them informed that their money has been going to causes that are very useful. And then secondly is we really spent a lot of time learning about the PAC. It's like a team of 4 people now, but learning about education rather. I did a poll to parents in swing states, and I was like, what is your biggest concern with education? And it was school safety. And it was it wasn't even close to the second number 2 thing. And understanding and learning what parents are really talking about in schools. And so a lot of the sexy conversations over CRT and trans stuff, they've absolutely whittled away over time. And I've had real conversations with people who are on the ground. And our point is to reflect what people are really talking about in those individualized school districts. I think a big problem for the right was they were running about, the books, the sexualized books and stuff like that in districts that didn't have that issue or that they didn't even know about it. And, it just seemed like it was just too much and it was too crazy. And when the left said their book banners, that was super effective. And we just were never part of that. We were never part of that conversation because very quickly I said, if we want to survive, rather than just being a sexy flash in the pan on issues that people care about in the moment, we're going to have to really understand what people care about when it comes to education. So we did elections in Wisconsin, Alabama, Tennessee, Texas this year. We have more coming in Arizona and Maryland. And we're talking about fallouts from reading standards and school safety, and that we need independent audits on school spending for third parties. These are what people are talking about. Their taxes. So often school boards control your local taxes. These are what people are talking about. So if they're in a district where CRT is the number one issue, or trans stuff is the number one issue, we're absolutely going to be upfront and talk about it. But where it's not our job to go to a local community when it's something so important to them as their public school education, which is very, very, very deep, and then insist that they assume the worst when we don't know if that's the case. In Wisconsin, we won 2 seats in Eau Claire, which is very liberal. We were talking about drug use among children and how bad it is there. That's the pressing issue for that district. So I think that's how we've been able to survive, is we got really far away from the most attractive flash in the pan. We talk to our candidates. We sit there and see, what are your opinions? What are you what is your moral compass? And if it's something we agree with, then that's something we'll back. so it's not like we're not backing conservatives. We are backing conservatives, but we don't make it like you have to believe X, Y, and Z and make this the forefront of your campaign. I want you to talk about what people care about, where you live.
Yeah, if anything, it sounds to me you're kind of engaging the community even more so than a district that you aren't necessarily involved in, by basically going to people and asking what's going on. So you mentioned school safety is, I assume, the predominant issue everywhere, not just in that poll you did then, but when you talk to people, most likely it's school safety?
It's not everywhere, but it is almost everywhere. Schools, and it's for some parents, for a few parents, it's that someone will come into a school like with a gun and shoot the students.
Right.
But for most parents, it's that a violent student will attack other students and teachers. And that's a big part of teacher retention too, is that they cannot deal with, you can't kick a kid out of public school almost anywhere, and especially in liberal areas. So my best friend's a middle school teacher, and he was telling me horror stories. But I think he's like, I have one kid who starts fires in class and I can't get rid of him. Like it can't.
And that starts at the school board level in terms of policy, in terms of proper
and part of enforcement policy for sure. You know, we're expanding. We just launched a nonprofit to talk about state legislative and school board policy goals to try, because the biggest problem we saw after 2 years was that people were like, okay, we got elected. Now what? Like some places were thriving, like Miami-Dade. We have a woman named Monica Colucci who's so fabulous when we got her elected. She's so brilliant. And she started working on a pilot program almost immediately to insert classical education into the reading curriculum of all Miami-Dade public schools. Like this fabulous idea. I think it's so great. They're starting it this year. I think first and second grade, and then it goes to third and fourth the following year or whatever, and it will expand. But they're starting now, and she's been working on it for over 2 years. I think that's a great idea. I think classical education is wonderful. I brought this up to the Secretary of Education or head of the education, like for a state legislator, like the head person in a committee, and he was like, "That's a great idea. Are we allowed to do that?" I go, "I don't friggin' know. I'm not a member of the state legislature. You are." Yeah. And he just was like, "That's a wonderful idea." And the amount of sharing information is very, very limited at the school board level. So if you could sit there and do something where you could share action plans, common sense legislation, things that really matter, and you could have somebody who's working on, doing research. How do you keep teachers in schools more? How do you sit there and improve reading and math scores? How do you improve safety standards? And how do you deal with CRT? How do you deal with the trans issue? How do you deal with like protecting girls' sports and Title IX and all the rest of it? Well, then that's a good place to sit there and start. So that's what we're working on along now. And we're building we're slowly becoming the NRA of education, where we're going to face all these issues one by one. But now the nonprofits launched this year. We finally got our IRS status.
Congratulations. Yeah, I think that's something that everyone can get behind. I'm no Tucker Carlson, but donate to the PAC, okay? Donate to the PAC. You might not get $100,000.
Yeah,
but,
it's all right. We're doing,
yeah.
I mean, we do well now, so we're okay.
And I know you guys are okay now, but I just think this is a case of putting your money where your mouth is. Most people really agree with what you're saying, but again, don't have the means or the expertise to necessarily navigate. Like you said, even people in the state legislatures don't know per se.
You would be shocked by the amount of things people in elected office do not know. Like, I mean, I was with people from Oklahoma, pretty prominent people, and they were talking about trying to balance the state budget, but without raising taxes. And I said, why don't you just increase your tax on not repatriation. What is it? Where people send money home who are immigrants. Whoa, I forget the term now. Sorry, I just literally.
Oh, I know exactly. What you're
yeah, but on money sent overseas, and they said, I said, you're the only state in the country to have a tax on that. And then he looked at me and goes, we have a tax on that? Like, what are you like? You have no idea how often it is that people just simply don't know. Like, ignorance is bliss, and a lot of people just don't know the very basics. So
that's one way of putting it.
Yeah.
But if people don't want to be ignorant about all kinds of things, they can follow You're writing. You on Twitter. So where can people find you? Where can people support
so
you?
on Twitter, it's at Ryan Girdusky. I have the National Populist newsletter on Substack, which I actually have to work on today a little bit. But I have to write something or other. I don't know what I'm to talk about. But I'm tired of talking about the election. But that is but the National Populist newsletter on Substack. And then, and check me out whenever I appear on CNN.
If people want to watch some fireworks, you're on CNN tonight.
Yeah, tonight. I'll be on tonight at 11 o'clock for whatever show that is. Yeah,
sweet. Now, it's going to be tough to top the Floyd Effect clip.
Yeah,
you're going to need something.
I don't have the complex where I have to top myself. I just want to sit there and try to tell some truth. So
love that. Hey, and we're going to have to get you on the Loopcast live.
I would love to do that for sure.
We're definitely going to pull that off. It's going to be great. You get along great with Josh and Erica.
Yeah, I like Josh. I follow his stuff on Twitter.
Yeah, I figured you'd like Josh. I feel like you guys have a lot of parallels. He's kind of our internal Ryan.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
But yeah, thanks so much for the time. And
thank you.
Go follow Ryan. Appreciate it.